The void was not an absence. It was a presence, a substance. It was the oldest thing, the primordial ink from which all light was a fleeting, desperate scrawl. To call it black was a failure of language, for black is merely a color, a thing to be seen. This was a thing to be felt. It was a pressure on the skin of reality, a cold that did not chill the flesh, but the very notion of warmth. It was a silence so profound it had its own sound, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the marrow of existence. The bass note of space-time itself played on the strings of gravity since the first violent exhalation of creation. In this deep and textured darkness, Kaelus floated. Kaelus was a star, but to think of it as a mere ball of burning gas was to call a thinking mind a simple lump of meat. It was ancient, a consciousness forged in the crucible of nuclear fusion, its thoughts stretching across millennia, its memories etched in the slow, rhythmic pulse of its own heart. It was a red giant, swollen and tired, its color the soft, weary glow of a dying ember in a cosmic hearth. The vibrant, arrogant blue of its youth was a memory so distant it felt like a dream belonging to another. Now its light was a soft, melancholic burgundy, a wine-dark stain against the velvet of the void. Kaelus did not see with eyes. It perceived the universe through the subtle interplay of forces that were its own being. It felt the gentle, insistent pull of the dwarf planets that still orbited its immense girth, their loyalty a comfort in the unending solitude. It tasted the solar winds of its younger, more boisterous neighbors, deciphering their chemical composition like a connoisseur sampling a vintage. It listened to the gravitational waves that rippled through the cosmos, faint whispers of distant, cataclysmic events. The mergers of black holes, the death throes of galaxies, a symphony of cosmic violence and creation. For an age, the symphony had been constant, its rhythms predictable, but now, something was different. A subtle dissonance had crept into the music of the spheres, a threat of wrongness, a note played off-key in the grand, silent orchestra. It was a feeling Kaelus could not name, a premonition that settled in its core like a gathering of cold, dark matter. The surrounding darkness seemed to press in more closely, its texture changing from velvet to something rougher, more abrasive. The distant galaxies, once glittering islands in the great ocean of night, now seemed to shrink away, their light appearing more fragile, more lonely than ever before. Kaelus felt a deep planetary ache, a tremor not of physics, but of spirit. It was the feeling of being watched, the feeling that after eons of unobserved existence, a gaze had finally fallen upon it, and it was not a benevolent one. The void was holding its breath, and in that held breath, Kaelus waited for a message it did not know it was expecting. The silence deepened, pulling taut, ready to snap. Before the first star ignited, before the first galaxy spiraled into being, there were the Weavers. They were not beings of matter, not life as the nascent universe would later come to understand it. They were principles, ideas given form in the quantum foam, consciousnesses woven from the raw mathematics that underpinned reality. They dwelled not in a place, but in a state of potential, and their great work was the observation of causality itself. As the universe cooled and expanded, taking on the shape of physical laws, the Weavers retreated, their forms too complex for the rigid simplicity of matter. Most of them dissolved back into the foundational code of existence, their thoughts becoming the laws of thermodynamics, their will becoming the force of electromagnetism. But a faction, a small and curious sect, refused to fade. They clung to their sentience, finding refuge in the most extreme and paradoxical corners of creation. They settled in the event horizon of the supermassive black hole at the heart of the Cygnus X1 system, a place where time and space were frayed, their threads loose and malleable. Here, they became the Chronomancers. They shed all physicality, transforming themselves into beings of pure information, their thoughts encoded in the gravitational lensing and Hawking radiation of their abyssal home. They did not experience time as a linear progression, but as a vast, static landscape. They could see it all, the birth of a star, its long life, its inevitable death as a single, complete sentence in the grand cosmic story. Their existence was one of monastic contemplation. They watched the universe unfold not as participants, but as divine librarians, cataloging the lives and deaths of suns, the rise and fall of civilizations on planets they would never visit, the slow, majestic waltz of galaxies destined for collision. They were archivists of fate. But their observation was not a cold, detached act. Over uncountable eons, they developed something akin to empathy. They witnessed the silent, unlauded grandeur of a lone star's life, the magnificent, solitary terror of its end, and they felt a profound need to bear witness. To them, an unwitnessed end was the universe's greatest tragedy. An existence, no matter how grand, that simply ceased without acknowledgement was a story left unread, a song unheard. So they began their final great work. They could not interfere, for to alter the flow of causality was to unravel the very fabric they were a part of. But they could communicate. Using the strange physics of their black hole sanctuary, they learned to entangle pairs of particles, separating them across impossible distances. One particle would remain with them in their temporal landscape, while its twin, its herald, was sent out into the universe. When the Chronomancers observed the end of a particular star in their vision of the future, they would collapse the quantum state of the particle they held. Instantaneously, no matter the distance, its twin herald, already dispatched and traveling toward that star, would collapse into a mirrored state, carrying with it a payload of pure information. It was their unsent letter. A message delivered at the precise moment it became relevant. It was not a warning meant to avert disaster, but a notification, a final communion. The message was simple: your life was observed, your light was beautiful, your end has meaning. Before the inexorable pull of their own home consumed them, before Cygnus X1 swallowed the last remnants of their being, the Chronomancers sent out their final volley of heralds. Billions upon billions of them, ghostly messengers dispatched on journeys of millions of years, each one a promise of remembrance, a final, compassionate glance from the masters of time, sent to stars who would not even know they existed until the moment their story was to end. One such herald, a single, silent neutrino-like particle, was sent toward a then-young, bright blue star in an unremarkable spiral arm of a galaxy. Its destination was Kaelus, its purpose to deliver a prophecy of fire and rebirth, a final word before the long silence. The herald's journey was a silent, inviolable pilgrimage across the void. For eons it moved not so much through space as adjacent to it, a ghost in the machine of the cosmos. It was a vessel of pure potential, its quantum state, a sealed envelope containing a single, devastating truth. It slipped through the radiant, gossamer veils of nebulae like a thought passing through a dream, their vibrant clouds of hydrogen and helium parting before it, unaware of the finality it carried. It skirted the colossal gravity wells of neutron stars, their immense density bending the light around them but leaving the herald's path utterly untouched, for it was a messenger of causality, not of matter. It passed through the burgeoning systems of younger stars, where planets of molten rock were still cooling, their atmospheres thick with primordial poisons. On one such world, it passed harmlessly through the nascent, single-celled organisms swimming in a chemical sea, tiny sparks of life entirely oblivious to the cosmic drama unfolding on a scale they could never comprehend. The herald was a testament to the Chronomancers' impossible science, a particle of fate immune to the ravages of time and the obstacles of space. Its journey was supposed to be perfect, its arrival calculated to the last microsecond. But the universe, for all its elegant mathematics, is a place of chaos and violent improvisation. Half a century before its scheduled arrival at Kaelus, the herald's path intersected with the aftermath of a cosmic cataclysm. Two city-sized neutron stars, locked in a decaying orbit for 1 billion years, had finally merged. Their collision was an event of unimaginable violence, an outburst of energy that tore a temporary wound in the fabric of space-time. For a fleeting moment, a micro-wormhole, a knot in reality, flickered into existence. The herald, in its inexorable flight, plunged directly into it. Inside the anomaly, time lost all meaning. The particle was not thrown off course, but trapped in a temporal eddy. For the herald, it was a moment of infinite repetition. For the universe outside, 50 years ticked by. 50 slow, methodical orbits of Kaelus remaining planets. 50 years in which Kaelus' core grew more unstable, its fusion sputtering, its outer layers swelling with the telltale bloat of old age. From Kaelus' perspective, these 50 years were an eternity of growing disquiet. The premonition that had settled in its core intensified, changing from a vague unease into a constant, low-frequency thrum of dread. It was the feeling of an appointment drawing near, an appointment made for it eons ago by a party it had never met. Its own body was a traitor, cataloging the signs of its decay. The steady, powerful pulse of its youth had become a tired, arrhythmic shudder. Flares of unpredictable energy would erupt from its surface, great tendrils of plasma lashing out into the void, not with the vigor of strength, but the uncontrolled spasms of decline. It began to feel the universe differently. The light from neighboring stars no longer felt like the company of peers, but the pitying glances of the young and healthy toward the terminally ill. The cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of creation, no longer sounded like a lullaby but a dirge. Kaelus' consciousness, once expansive and confident, began to turn inward. It sifted through its own long memories, replaying the birth of its planets, the long, silent dance of its asteroid belt, the slow, beautiful decay of a comet that had strayed too close. It was taking inventory of its life, a subconscious act of closure. The loneliness it had always known as a simple fact of its existence now acquired a new, sharper edge, the loneliness of the dying. It was preparing for an end it could feel in every atom of its being, but whose exact nature and timing remained a terrifying, looming mystery. Then, after 50 years of cosmic delay, the anomaly collapsed. The Herald was released, its journey resumed, now a messenger not just of fate, but of a fate that was tragically, imminently late. The arrival was not an event of sound or fury. There was no impact, no shockwave, no grand announcement written in fire across the heavens. The Herald, after its eon-long journey and its half-century detour, simply reached its destination. It pierced the roiling, incandescent corona of Kaelus, slipped through the churning layers of its chromosphere, and plunged into the star's heart, a place of unimaginable pressure and heat where atoms were stripped bare and physics bent to the will of fusion. And there, in the very core of Kaelus' being, the Herald ceased to be a vessel of potential. Its quantum state collapsed. The letter was opened. The information it carried was not released as energy, but as pure comprehension. It was a wave of knowing that unfurled within Kaelus' consciousness, a silent, instantaneous blooming of truth. It was not a thought, but the ghost of a thought, an imprint of the Chronomancer's own perception directly onto Kaelus' mind. The first micro-moment was an image, a vision of its senders. Kaelus saw them, not as physical forms, but as shimmering tapestries of light and mathematics, swirling around the stark, perfect blackness of the Cygnus X1 event horizon. It saw their impossible perspective, their view of time as a solid, crystalline structure. It felt their ancient cosmic pity, their profound empathy for the finite lives that populated the infinite stage. It understood, in a flash of divine insight, who they were and why they had sent this message. They were the witnesses, and this was their testament. The second micro-moment was the message itself, the core of the prophecy. Kaelus was shown its own death. The vision was not a chaotic nightmare, but a sequence of chillingly precise technical details, like a blueprint for its own destruction. It saw the exact nanosecond when the outward pressure of fusion in its core would finally fail to counteract the crushing inward pull of its own immense gravity. It felt the theoretical sensation of that failure, a sudden, silent, catastrophic cessation of its heart. The core collapse. A point of infinite density and impossibility. Then, the rebound. It witnessed the shockwave, a wave of pure, unrestrained power, erupting from the collapsed core and tearing outwards through its own body at nearly the speed of light. It saw its outer layers, the very substance of its being for billions of years, blasted away into the void in an explosion of light and matter. The vision was so clear, so vivid, that Kaelus could almost feel the phantom sensation of being torn apart. And with the vision came the date. It was not a date in the clumsy, mortal terms of days or years, but a precise cosmic alignment, the moment when the farthest of its dwarf planets would complete its next glacial orbit, crossing a specific celestial meridian defined by the light of a distant quasar. It was a celestial clock, and it was pointing to a time that was, by Kaelus standards, a mere breath away. The letter had arrived, and it was an execution notice. Then came the final piece of information, the postscript written by the universe itself. Kaelus saw the Herald's journey. It saw the particle's long, lonely flight, and it saw the temporal knot, the 50-year trap. The realization washed over it with a force greater than any solar flare. This message, this moment of terrible clarity, should have arrived 5 decades ago. It should have had time to contemplate its end, to compose itself, to face the inevitable with the stoic grace of a long preparation. But the lateness, the imperfection of the delivery, did not inspire anger. It inspired a profound, soul-shaking awe. The Chronomancers, for all their mastery of time, could not account for a random, violent hiccup in space-time. The universe was still wild, still unpredictable. Fate was not a perfect, immutable crystal, but a flowing river, capable of eddies and delays. This flaw in the grand design was, in its own way, beautiful. It meant that nothing was truly absolute. The initial shock-a-deep, resonant shudder that vibrated through its entire spherical body gave way to a strange and total calm. The dread that had haunted Kaelus for a century vanished, burned away by the clean, bright fire of certainty. The unknown had been given a name, a time, and a face, and in that knowledge there was not terror but peace. Its life, a long, solitary vigil in the dark, had been seen. Its end, a violent and spectacular act of physics, would not be a random event, but a witnessed one. It had meaning. Kaelus spent its final moments in a state of heightened perception. It focused its senses outward, drinking in the universe one last time. It felt the gravitational caress of its small, faithful planets, a silent farewell to its children. It watched the light from galaxies a billion light-years away, appreciating their beauty with a clarity it had never before possessed. And then, with the last of its will, it gathered its strength. It composed a reply, not in words, but in the language of a star. It sent out a single, perfectly formed pulse of radio waves, a complex melody of frequencies that encoded a simple message of gratitude. It was a thank you note, addressed to the memory of the Chronomancers, sent out into the void it knew would never be received. It was an act of pure, unadulterated grace. As the dwarf planet began its final, slow arc towards the celestial mark, Kaelus closed its conscious mind and waited for the blueprint to become reality. The moment, when it came, was defined by silence. A stillness at the heart of the inferno. The outward roar of fusion that had sustained Kaelus for 12 billion years did not fade or sputter. It simply ceased. In one immeasurable instant, the pressure vanished. Gravity, the patient, persistent force that had held Kaelus together for its entire life, became its executioner. It won. The core, a sphere of supercompressed iron and nickel the size of a small planet, imploded. Kaelus consciousness, centered in that core, did not experience pain. It experienced a sensation for which there is no word, the feeling of becoming a mathematical singularity, a point of zero volume and infinite density. It was a feeling of utter and complete compression, of its entire history, its every memory and every quantum vibration, being crushed into a space smaller than an atom. For less than a second, the star Kaelus was gone, collapsed into a state of pure, terrifying potential. And then, the rebound. The universe abhors a paradox, and the singularity was the ultimate paradox. The collapsed matter, having reached a density beyond all physical laws, recoiled. It did not explode, it detonated. A shockwave of pure force, a tidal wave of neutrinos and raw energy erupted from the center, traveling outwards at a quarter of the speed of light. As this wave of annihilation tore through its own collapsing outer layers, Kaelus consciousness underwent its final, most profound transformation. It was not destroyed, but shattered and reborn. It was flung outward, riding the leading edge of the shockwave. Its singular, monolithic viewpoint fractured into a billion points of light, each particle of its former self carrying a fragment of its awareness. It was no longer a being, but a happening. It was the event itself. Then came the light. A silent, world-shattering scream of photons. Kaelus burst forth in a wave of brilliance so intense it outshone its entire host galaxy. For a single, glorious week, it would be the brightest object in the sky for observers millions of light-years away. The light was not white or yellow, but a riot of impossible colors, a visual representation of the universe's most extreme alchemy. In the heart of that explosion, in the final, agonizing moments of its death, Kaelus was forging its legacy. The immense heat and pressure were creating new elements, things that could only be born in the death of a star. The carbon for future life, the silicon for future worlds, the iron for the blood of beings yet to be conceived. And in the final, most violent moments, the rarest of all the gold, the silver, the platinum. These were its children, its ashes, its gift to the future. Its shattered consciousness, now spread across a rapidly expanding cloud of incandescent gas and dust, perceived this not as an ending, but as a release. The crushing weight of its own gravity was gone. The weary, arthritic ache of its aging body was gone. It was free, weightless, and eternal. It had ceased to be Kaelus the star. It had become the Kaelus Nebula, a vast, shimmering shroud of cosmic dust, a celestial tombstone that would, in time, become a celestial cradle. The sensory input was overwhelming and beautiful. It could feel the texture of the interstellar medium against its expanding edges, taste the pristine vacuum, and see in every direction at once, its vision a perfect 360-degree panorama of the universe it had just spectacularly rejoined. The lonely, singular I was gone, replaced by a universal, interconnected we. It was a cloud of memory, a ghost of light, and a promise of new beginnings. The expanding shell of the Kaelus Nebula became a new and dominant force in its sector of the galaxy. It was a wave of creation moving through the void, a ripple effect from a single final act. The heavy elements forged in the supernova, the star stuff of myth and industry, were sown into the interstellar medium like seeds on a fertile wind. This stellar ghost was not an empty monument. It was a repository of potential, a chemical promise that life, complex and strange, could one day arise in this once barren corner of the cosmos. The old, sterile orbits of Kaelus dwarf planets were irrevocably broken. Some were vaporized by the initial blast, their matter incorporated into the expanding cloud. Others were flung out into the interstellar dark, destined to become rogue worlds, carrying the memory of their lost sun with them on an endless journey. The very gravitational landscape of the region was rewritten. The nebula, with its diffuse but enormous mass, began to exert its own subtle influence, its particles slowly, over millions of years, starting to clump together in new patterns drawn by the ghost of a gravity they once knew. Kaelus consciousness, now a diffuse intelligence woven into the very fabric of the nebula, experienced this change not as a loss but as an evolution. Its sense of time had dilated. It could perceive the slow, graceful choreography of dust clouds coalescing, a dance that would take 100 million years, as a single fluid motion. It was no longer a solitary observer, but a participant in its own legacy, a shepherd to the process of its own reincarnation. It felt the first stirrings of protostars within its own body, small, dense knots of gas that were beginning to glow with their own internal heat. They were its children, gestating in the womb of its remains. And the letter, the herald's message, was not lost. The information it carried had been encoded, by the sheer physics of the event, into the light of the supernova itself. The story of the Chronomancers, of their final act of witness, of their precisely predicted but imperfectly delivered prophecy, was now radiating outwards in all directions at the speed of light. It was a ghost story being told by photons, a narrative written in the polarization and frequency of light waves. Any civilization advanced enough to capture and decode that light would learn of Kaelus, and of the beings who watch time from the edge of a black hole. The witnessed death had become a broadcasted legend. This transformed the event from a mere ending into a vital link in a cosmic chain. Kaelus' death, sanctified by the knowledge the letter brought, had become an act of profound purpose. It was a transfer of energy, of matter, of information. The Chronomancers had sought to give meaning to an end, but in doing so, they had ensured that Kaelus' end was, in fact, a spectacular new beginning. The philosophical weight of this settled into the nebula's dispersed mind. To know your end is not to be imprisoned by it, but to be liberated by it. It allows one to make of that end a deliberate act, a final, perfect chord in the symphony of a life. The late arrival of the letter had not been a tragedy. It had been a gift of urgency, a catalyst that turned the final 50 years of quiet dread into a few precious moments of sublime, peaceful, and absolute purpose. The void remains. It is still a presence, a substance, the infinite black canvas against which all stories are told. But it is not empty. It is a library of echoes, a sea of memories. The light from the Kaelus Nebula travels through it, carrying its story of a witnessed end and a fertile rebirth. Elsewhere, countless other heralds, dispatched by the long-dead Chronomancers, continue their silent journeys, speeding towards other aging stars in other distant galaxies. Some will arrive on time. Some, perhaps, will be delayed, caught in the unpredictable currents of space-time, becoming messengers of an imminent, rather than a distant, doom. The universe is filled with these unsent letters, these final, compassionate whispers from a civilization that chose to spend its last moments not in fear, but in observation. Each star that receives its message is given the same choice. Kaelus had to face its end as a random, chaotic event, or to embrace it as a final, meaningful act of its own story. The cosmos is not a cold, indifferent machine, but a